Welcome to Wordsmith. My name is Clay Smith. I'm so glad you've joined us for today's conversation. We normally do an audio podcast where each week we say we go to the Word of God, that we know the God of the Word. But from time to time, I do special editions or episodes, and today we are doing that in a video format, and I'm so grateful to have you join us today for today's conversation. And today we're going to look back at America, or perhaps look forward at the future of America as we are about to enter July 4th, 2026, which we call our semiquincentennial anniversary, 250 years old as a nation. And we want to have a conversation, not as Americans primarily, but as Christians who live in America. And I can't help but to think of many anecdotes. One that comes to mind is one from Benjamin Franklin, who, when asked what kind of government had been formed, he replied, "A republic, if you can keep it." And so perhaps that is the question we're still asking: can we keep this republic, and what does it mean to keep this republic? And I'm so grateful to have three wonderful guests and friends, all Johnson Ferry Church members, with me today in this conversation. And so let me introduce them. I'll just go around the table. Well, you guys go together because you're married. These are the Petersons, Nels and Jennifer Peterson. Both of you are very interested in American history, which is why you're here. You also have legal training and background. Jennifer, you being a lawyer yourself, trained at both Princeton and Harvard Law, where you met Nels at Harvard Law as well. Nels, in addition to being a lawyer, is now a judge, the Chief Justice for the state of Georgia, which is a certainly wonderful position. We're not going to call you Your Honor in this conversation. Yeah. And more importantly than all those roles, you guys are parents and wonderful people who make such a great contribution in Johnson Ferry. So grateful to have you guys on today. And then here to my right is Valentina Seleznev, who is also a wonderful person, just celebrated her birthday. I won't give the year, though.
No,
okay. But just celebrated her birthday and has been a longtime member of Johnson Ferry. Also has a very unique perspective to this conversation because you were not born in America. You are from Kyrgyzstan originally, which a lot of our longtime Johnson Ferry people will know that was one of the first, in fact, the very first international partnership that we had as a church in Kyrgyzstan, and it led to many wonderful things, one of which is you coming here.
Oh, thank you.
And as
my blessing.
And you've lived in Georgia for a while. I know your first stop was not in Georgia, but
It was in New York City for 9 months, which my husband says it is not America. The Lord saved that and brought us to America eventually in
Georgia.
1993 into the loving hands of Georgia.
well, we're grateful that he did lead you here. So all three of you are followers of Jesus, and that's the primary lens by which we want to have this conversation. So thank you for being on today. Let me ask this first question, and any one of you can jump in. But as you reflect on 250 years of American history, what are you most grateful for as a Christian living in this nation?
Well, I'm thankful to be here. Thanks so much for having Nels and me. But I'm grateful that God put me here in this country, in this time, out of all the places in the world that I get to be the beneficiary of 250 years of history, but particularly 250 years ago, those men who put it all on the line, their lives, their property, their families' eternal shame or glory for this experiment under which people get to live in freedom because God endowed them with these unalienable rights. Yeah. And I'm so grateful that we get to worship together and raise our family together and live our life according to God's will as we see it for our family.
Yeah, interesting word, experiment, which is, I think, a fitting word. And all in all, 250 years is not that old compared to many other civilizations. But Nels, what about you? What are you most thankful for?
Freedom. Mm-hmm. This is echoing everything that Jen says, as a good husband will. There is no better place in the history of humanity in terms of just living experience. Yeah. We look back at a lot of previous times sort of with nostalgia and fondness, and we can do that only because we blind ourselves to all of the problems that those times had.
Yeah.
this is an unbelievable country and an unbelievable time in an unbelievable country. And of all the times and places in the history of the world, God allowed us to live here. I mean, that's amazing.
Yeah. Yeah. I echo that. Valentina, what about you? What are you most thankful for?
Well, I definitely prepared to say that mostly I'm thankful for freedom, of course, because as Pastor just told, I came from one of the republics of the former Soviet Union, where the religion was forbidden, Bible was a bad book and was forbidden, and you were not allowed to have it. I've never seen it before while I lived in Kyrgyzstan at that time, that people were persecuted just because they were trying to find God. There were some churches, definitely, but they were only for sick, elderly people or people for, with limited, health or having a lot of health issues. They were forgiven to go to very few churches that were still open there with no persecution and no consequences. If you read the Bible, if they would find the Bible in your house, you would be put into prison. Wow. Well, that was long ago. And that's why when every Sunday I come in the morning to this beautiful, wonderful church, which is actually my ever first church, and I was so blessed to be here. This is freedom, and I'm so grateful, and it doesn't have any limits for that.
What a perspective. I can't help but to think about Paul and his speech in Athens in Acts 17, and he's obviously getting to Jesus and calling on them to believe in Jesus. But one of the rationale that he uses is to say that God determined the boundaries of man's habitation, which would read as saying, in some providential way of God, he determined that you lived in a particular nation at a particular time. And there's a mystery to that we'll never know this side of heaven. But I believe that we're all here for a reason, and that comes with responsibility. But the reason that they were given those habitations is that they would seek him and find him. And so the heartbeat of this conversation is to talk about what does it look like to seek God, to find him in this particular nation, in this particular time. And I don't think any of us would ascribe perfection to our nation as if we don't have issues. I mean, to your point earlier, Nels, it's easy to look back on history and to whitewash sometimes some of the problems because of the rose-colored glasses. And I don't think any of us come to our country with rose-colored glasses. And at the same time, we come with an attitude of gratefulness and stewardship about conserving something, stewarding something that we've been handed. And I look forward to talking about that with you. A few anecdotes I want to throw along the way. Here's one by Abraham Lincoln, which I reread last night, his Gettysburg Address, which is so short, but just brilliant. I mean, the thing is just brilliant. And I'm told that he did not have the phrase "under God" in some of the first drafts of that, but it was added later. And I'll just read it for our listeners who haven't heard it in a while. Abraham Lincoln said that from these honored dead we take increased devotion to that cause for which they gave the last full measure of devotion, that we here highly resolve that these dead shall not have died in vain, that this nation, under God, shall have a new birth of freedom, and the government of the people, by the people, for the people, shall not perish from the earth. I mean, that's a sentence. Like, I can never write anything like that in my life. So anyways, but I think about that our nation has adopted phrases like, quote, "in God we trust," or "one nation under God." And I'd love to talk about what, in your mind, what do those phrases communicate at their best? And then what is perhaps dangerous when those phrases are misunderstood? Anybody want to jump in on that?
Well, I don't know whether it is exactly the answer to what you just wanted us to share, but I believe that, as much as I know about Americans' history, it was founded on Christianity. Oh, that's how I, view it. You may, guys, help me with that. But my understanding is that because at that time people valued, church was very valued in the society, and it played an important role in the in their everyday life, in their work, in their families, and even in the government, as you just said. But in God we trust, it might become a phrase that means nothing. And very many times we hear today how people, irrespectfully to God himself, is using it. It's not in God we trust because it's just a phrase said some long ago and we got used to it. We need to remember that this country was founded on Christianity. And even with today's, I would say, imperfections that we see in the society, it still remains a very strong, very powerful country. And it's not because of the wealth or military, power. It is only because people always, from the very beginning of this country, remembered that all the blessings ultimately come from God. They focus on God and looked for God. While in my country, in the contrast, God was taken out. And the country that is the richest in the world in territory, the richest almost in the world with natural resources and mineral resources. But even today, with the changes within the Russia after the fall of the Soviet Union, the life is full of hardships. There is nothing because God is not in the center of their lives.
Yeah. What about you, Jennifer? What would you say to that?
Well, this might be an unpopular take, but
Let's hear it.
our Supreme Court, our United States Supreme Court, that is, has said that it's okay that we say "in God we trust" and on our money and things like that, because it's what they call it is ceremonial deism. They literally say that it's okay because it doesn't really mean anything.
Yeah.
That's the law of our land. And so I don't think that as a Christian there's a lot of value to pushing to have these statements more prevalent in our culture if everybody agrees that they don't really mean anything. I think that our job as Christians is to change hearts one at a time with the truth of God's love and the gospel of his grace, and not by meaningless public proclamations.
Yeah.
I agree 100% that using the name of God meaninglessly is actually forbidden by the Ten Commandments, I think. I do think, as originally conceived, it really is a callback to the founding of the country. The John Winthrops who imagined this as a shining city upon the hill. At the same time, this is a place of religious freedom, and particularly as Baptists, that's something that we have always historically valued and prized. And religious freedom was a big part of why many of the settlers of the New World came here in the first place. And so it's the good thing is the things it reminds us of if we think about it properly. The downside is some people can think of it as exclusionary or cutting against that religious freedom, and it's not doing that either.
Yeah.
It says, "In God we trust," but it's not saying who the country is for, and that's an important distinction, I think.
To your point, Jennifer, there's a distinction between persuasion and coercion, and I hear you advocating for the former. And
I've never even argued someone into believing in Christ.
Nor have I. I've tried, but
Ditto.
yeah. But yeah, it's ceremonial deism. That's. Tell me more about that phrase. I think I know what you mean, but what do you mean by that?
That's what the Supreme Court has called it. Yeah. Because they struggle with the text of our First Amendment that says the country can't establish a state religion.
Yep.
But does it look like when we have this on our money that we're establishing a state religion? And the way that they square that is to say it's just ceremonial. It's just deism. It's not even really religion. It doesn't mean anything. Yeah. And that's exactly the problem with it.
And what you cannot disagree with, well, you can disagree with it, but it's factually true that a majority of our founding fathers and framers of the Constitution certainly did so with you might call it Judeo-Christian worldview. I mean, some of them very fervent believers, some of them probably deist. So I'm not going to say they were all evangelical, Jesus-loving men and women, but certainly that was the worldview in which our founding documents were written and conceived, and this nation was conceived. And it's all over the place if you look for it. I was in Washington, D.C. Last year, and we were doing a tour of the House where the president gives the State of the Union, and we stood up there on the rostrum. I didn't know this until being in that room, but there's all these icons and of different thinkers through the ages, and they're all looking to the side, with the exception of one. And when you look at the rostrum, the only one who's looking at you is Moses, and he's right in the back of the hall staring at you. And it's those little things that until you see it, you can easily miss just how foundational Christianity has been to the origin of this nation as it is conceived. It's really fascinating.
The one other thing I'll say about the motto, sort of, we adopted it in the 1950s or 60s during the height of the Cold War as a counterpoint, as a way of distinguishing us from godless atheist Soviet Union.
Yes, that's who I was.
But the framers really did have an understanding without trying to force everyone to be Christian or some idea of Christian. They had the idea that this country is based on rights that come not from governments, but from God, from a creator. And that has always been central to the American premise. The day that rights don't have a permanent, immovable source is the day that they can just be taken away, and is the day that we turn to tyranny.
Nels, I want to ask you in particular, given that you are a judge and a chief justice at that, you spent your career in law, as you have as well, Jennifer. What constitutional principle do you think Americans most take for granted today?
So I would say it's not usually when we think about constitutional principles, we think about the Bill of Rights and particular provisions there. It isn't any of those. It's the structure of the whole thing. You look at the old Soviet Union, and the Soviet Union had a constitution that had a Bill of Rights. And some of those rights were way more impressive sounding than ours.
May I say something? Because it was taken from the Bible. That's the problem.
So
yes, they didn't know what to say.
They had all these big, enormous sounding rights, but they had no structural separation of powers, no judicial review, no ability for the citizens to hold their government to account. And so Justice Scalia once testified famously to Congress about this. You know, he starts reading all of these. He's like, oh, that sounds impressive. But they're just a parchment guarantee. They are words on a page that don't matter. The thing that makes our system work are the structural parts. The separation of powers, which comes from a Christian worldview understanding of fallen man as needing, power has to be constrained, and the capacity for the courts to adjudicate on behalf of even the powerless when those bounds have been overstepped. And this idea of the rule of law, which underlies all of that we're a nation of laws and not of men, that piece only works as long as we all buy into that. And that piece has started to erode. And I think we really take that for granted. And that civilizational capital that has built up over the centuries, we're spending down.
I agree. I have a slightly different answer, though, as a Baptist. And this is one we definitely take for granted.
I'm going to love this, whatever you're about to say. It's going to be great. Yeah.
It's not in Article 1. It's not in the Bill of Rights. It's buried way down in Article 6 of the Constitution. It's the religious test clause. This was really controversial at the Constitutional Convention, but our Constitution says no religious test shall ever be required to hold office in this country. That's a big deal. And as Baptists who have historically, it's easy to forget this, being at a big and prosperous church, but historically Baptists were an unpopular, disfavored Christian minority. If we had been allowed to have religious tests, we would have been out. Ministers of the gospel would have been cut out of public life. Yeah. Baptists would have been out of public life, and this country could have taken a very different trajectory.
Well, it's interesting, but in my country, though, the church and everything was forbidden, but the word Baptist was used as a very bad word. Let's say if you were kids...
It still is here, too, sometimes.
No, when you're playing with each other, kids, and they're not happy with you, they say, I don't want to play with you anymore, you're a Baptist.
Are you serious?
Yes, that's how we used to say it. That's how bad it was. And I know why.
Yeah.
I know why, because back in the Soviet Union, we never saw the Bible, never read it, but we were told that those Baptists, when their God tells them, take your son and sacrifice him, he will do it. And he did it. That's what we knew. So Baptist is better. But I'm so proud of being a member of Johnson Ferry Baptist Church because this is the only I knew a lot about Catholicism and Russian Orthodox. But to me, from my perspective, this is the only denomination that stays strong on what is written in the Bible. And in my church, I always watch the previous pastor and now today's pastor. So what he reads, what he says, but he gives me the thought to go and ponder on it and watch how it works in his life and in the life of those Christians who are my role models.
Let's talk about Baptists for a minute, a subject that I am equally interested in. So prior to the Declaration, many of the colonies had state-sponsored religion. Not all, but a lot of them did. Was congregational or Episcopal or Anglican or other things. And the one that did not was Baptist, which is why they were often maligned, and some were even arrested. In fact, if I remember this correctly, in Virginia, I think dozens of, even hundreds perhaps, of Baptist pastors were imprisoned because they were preaching without a state-sponsored license. And it was largely at the work of people like John Leland and some others who are advocates for religious liberty that persuaded people like Thomas Jefferson to advocate for what would become a non-establishment clause that would be added, as a First Amendment. And Baptists are largely responsible for that. In fact, the letter that Thomas Jefferson wrote to Baptists in Connecticut included the phrase that people often think is in the Constitution or the Bill of Rights, which is not. It is in a letter written to Baptists, but it's this letter that said that a wall of separation between the church and the state should not exist. I mean, that's what Jefferson said to Baptists. So Baptists have been people who...
And it made them happy.
And it made them happy, yes. And in fact, the Baptists, as a gift to Jefferson, gave him a 50-pound cheese wheel and wheeled it to his house. That was the gift. So... but it's interesting, religious liberty is one thing to advocate it when everyone is by and large Christian and you're trying not to assert one branch of Christianity over another. But we do live in a much more pluralistic world today where because of immigration and other things, our country is not primarily Christian. Or if it is primarily Christian, certainly there are many, many other religions represented in America now. So I'd just be curious to ask, can you still practice true religious liberty with competing religious worldviews? And if so, how?
Yes.
Yeah, let's talk about that.
So religious liberty protects the church from the state because the state is wholly incompetent to decide which church is the right one.
Amen.
And the moment that the government gets into that business, we're all in trouble. And that's the case regardless of which church it is. Yeah. I mean, there are churches that teach religious institutions that teach horrible, horrible, horrible things. Mm-hmm. And there are limits on the extent to which you can exercise those particular beliefs through practice. But the state cannot pick and choose between doctrines. Yeah. And even the extent to which you can practice what you preach is always a difficult one in establishment and free exercise doctrine. But it is important to remember that the right is a right to exercise your faith, and it's not merely freedom of belief or freedom to worship. Yes. Because those framings put it into Sunday morning.
Yeah. Or put it just between your ears.
And real exercise of genuine faith is a 24/7, 365 thing.
Yeah. But there are some who would say, yes, I agree with that, but the thought of a public neutrality is a myth. I mean, you have to come down on some side, right?
So, I mean, the law does legislate a lot of moralities. Mm-hmm. And so it matters who your legislators are.
Yep.
The law stands for the proposition that murder is bad.
Yeah.
And that's a good thing.
I agree.
But there's a line to that. And exactly where that line is really, really fuzzy.
That is fuzzy. It is fuzzy, yeah. And I think it's good to admit that it's fuzzy.
Yeah.
And that's part of what's being contested, I think.
A lot of people try to frame religious liberty as protecting the government from religion. And there is some truth to that, because when you see countries that have real, genuine religious control of the state, those typically go badly. Yeah. But mostly religious freedom and keeping the state and the church at a certain arm's length protects the purity of the church.
That's what Jefferson was reassuring the Danbury Baptists, not the other way around. The day that the government has the power to choose religious winners and losers, it is not too many days later that I will probably end up on the losing side of that question.
Yeah.
And it is true that there is no such thing as a position of absolute neutrality, because everyone, has picked a side on something.
Yeah.
But most of the people I know who are arguing against religious liberty on that basis are doing so because they think they're going to win. And that's a very foolish perspective to take.
Yeah. Let's talk about public life. Nels, you serve in a public role, though I'd be curious everyone's perspective on this. How do you engage in public life faithfully without allowing politics to become our primary identity, or perhaps an idol or something else? How do you navigate that tension? Because I would say, before any of you answer, I want to advocate for a new generation of men and women who would say, I want to play a role in my civic life in some way. Whether it's running for a local office, school board, a county commission, perhaps a state office, national office, even just the PTA at their school, or
especially the PTA.
Yeah, especially the PTA. But to take interest in serving the good of the society and the nation at large. And yet, I think with Christians sometimes, because we see abuses of that, we think, well, that can only lead to a path where you have to sell your soul or compromise your values or your beliefs. So how do we navigate that tension of being faithful to the Lord, but also being a good steward of your city, state, and nation? Any thoughts on that from anyone?
Well, it's easy for me to say because I've never run for public office. So I'll be interested to hear what Nels has to say, really. But humility, I think, is a key part of that. I think when we see people going off the deep end and making politics their idol, it's because they get wrapped up in the idea that these ideas are right to the exclusion of all else. And that leads to not being able to talk to people on the other side of a political divide. Yeah. It leads to forgetting that everyone is made in the image of God, has dignity, and is part of our Republican form of government. Yeah. But that's much easier said than done.
Well, even we talked before recording this, we talked about a former professor of yours, and one that I don't know but know of, Professor Robert George, who longtime law professor at Princeton, who famously has a very close relationship with Cornel West, who is very much on the other side of most political issues than Robert George. Different backgrounds, different races, different political opinions, and yet they do model something about how to navigate this tension. Anything you want to add, just what you've seen in that relationship, even as a student, or just your own perspective on that?
They call it civic friendship when they go around and talk about it, which is a very clinical way to describe it, though maybe it's useful. But what it really is two brothers in Christ who, even though there are so many things that divide them, even as both Christians, Professor West comes from a Black Baptist background. Professor George is Roman Catholic. Yeah. But even with religious differences, very strong political differences, they see each other first and foremost as brothers. And it's not just for show. I don't think either of them has gained any political capital by holding this friendship out. But I think they feel that there's value to modeling what civic friendship looks like. And that can certainly start with us within our own church. This is a big church with a lot of diverse political views. And if we can't do it here, I'm not sure there's a lot of hope beyond these walls.
Yeah. Valentina, what, as you think about this, how do you navigate trying to play a role in your society without compromising your Christian beliefs?
Well, it's actually a very difficult question to me because I am very far from whatever those brilliant people were talking about. I can only speak from a human point of view of the person who enjoys coming from a very, very, very different world and enjoy and see the the flaws of this society, the benefits of this society, and the only thing that I can say, what I love here, as I already said, is freedom, and also that America connects freedom with the responsibilities. Because many immigrants come here and thinking, this is American dream, so America will give me everything and I will prosper. No, America never promised, and God never promised to us to do anything free. It promised that that I need to work hard. They give me opportunity. They give me freedom to choose not only my religious beliefs, not only my political beliefs, but from my point of view, the ability to choose any profession, any vocation. I can go to any institute. It's plenty of opportunities for people born here and who came to the United States. And if religion and the freedom is connected with the responsibility, then we can talk about the future society that will be happy and flourishing.
Yeah. I've heard some talk about that distinction as a negative freedom and a positive freedom. The negative freedom would be a freedom from, whereas a positive freedom is a freedom for. And what I hear you advocating for there is the latter, to say that there is a freedom that comes here, but it's a freedom that comes with a responsibility for benefiting your society at large.
Exactly.
Yeah. And I think we've lost some of that. Meaning, I think sometimes freedom in the eyes of many has become an idolized autonomy, in the sense of freedom means I can do whatever I want, regardless of consequences,
No responsibilities.
regardless of how it affects other people. As long as I feel free to do it, that's what freedom means. And I don't think that's what. A, I don't think that's what you can build a society off of. But B, I don't think that was intended in any of our framers' thought about what it means to be a free society.
Well, like in any country of the world, when the word freedom is so nice and sugary and sweet, it seems that I can do anything in the world or everything and no responsibility, no consequences. That's not such a thing. And many people, not only in America, but all over the world, seeing what is happening as an older generation, I see that's what is lost in this society. I mean, in this world, I would say, in the world. Lost the responsibility and the understanding the limitations of freedom. And freedom, as in the full understanding, does have limitations. I connect them with the responsibilities. I may not express myself what I think in the best way, but that's what I feel. As an ordinary human being, I know God provided this life for me, not by accident. He wants my part to be, and He wants to use me here at this place, like you all previously mentioned, at this time, to do something. It doesn't matter in which field area, at home with my grandchildren and the friends of my grandchildren. The grandchild is born here in America. So it is a part of everybody has a responsibility to freedom, I think.
Valentina, you used an amazing word a few minutes ago, flourishing. I love that.
Yes.
I think that's what our founding fathers thought the purpose of freedom was, the freedom to promote human flourishing rather than human oppression. And that's the original task of man from Genesis 1, right? Yeah. To be fruitful and multiply, to extend the blessings of Eden to the whole world. That's still our mission today, and I'm so thankful that we are free to do that. And
to use a word you used earlier, this is an experiment, meaning that this is not the norm. What we experience, even in its imperfections, is not the norm from other civilizations, some of which have lasted for a millennia, but often at the hands of very coercive power that oppressed dissent. And whereas we, at least on paper, we opt for consent. Like we don't operate at the consent of the governed. And that does make this country exceptional. And that's a word that I'd love to ask you about, exceptional. We started using language at the beginning of this conversation about some form of American exceptionalism. And with the exception of you, Valentina, the rest of us have only lived in this country. So I'm sure living in multiple countries gives you a much more nuanced perspective on this. But in what ways is America exceptional? And what should we mean by that phrase? And perhaps what should we avoid in how we talk about our exceptionalism?
Let me borrow Professor George's answer to this
Sure.
question, which is still the best I've heard.
Yeah.
American exceptionalism is not that America is better than other countries. It is not that America is exceptional, meaning unique, in that America is not built on a piece of land or a shared race or language or religion like a lot of other countries in the world. What makes American exceptional, Professor George explains, is that we are built on an idea, the idea that all men are created equal and are endowed by their creator with these rights. Life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. That's it. And this is a country that anybody who shares those ideals can be a part of, even though they don't share a common bond of anything else but commitment to those ideals.
Yes, this is a great answer. Although I will push back on one thing. Our land is pretty amazing. I mean, and having two oceans on each side helps. So a lot of things.
We might not have lasted quite as
I think that's
long
what I'm
if we
saying,
were
yeah.
on the Iberian Peninsula.
Yeah, perhaps. What would you say to that, Nels? The word exceptional, what's good about that? What should be avoided about that?
So, I mean, Jen's answer was spot on. I do think there are some great advantages that America's had, and geography is a big part of that.
Yeah.
I mean, without the ocean in between us and Britain, we probably would have lost the Revolutionary War.
Yeah.
And the War of 1812, and a number of other wars that didn't happen because of the oceans. Enormous natural resources, but the fact that it's built on an idea, and the fact that it's built based on ideals of freedom, and you can't have a country this big and complicated and not have play in the joints and some room for pluralism and for people to be different. And we were the first to kind of sort of figure it out. We haven't done it perfectly, but we were the first.
Yeah.
And it is exceptional in that regard. Now, there have also been people throughout American history with really weird ideas about what American exceptionalism meant. Yeah. Like the Constitution was just as inspired by God as is Scripture, or that we play a unique role in redemptive history.
Yeah.
And those are
the
wrong.
new Israel, that kind of thing. Yeah. And it's such a fine line, is it not? Because you want to say that this country was founded by people with a Christian worldview, and certainly a lot of our founding documents are framed from a Christian worldview, but they're not the Bible.
Nope.
And never were meant to be.
No.
Yeah, and we are not Israel.
And they included flaws.
Yeah.
I mean, the Constitution as originally drafted counted slaves as 3/5 of a person.
Yeah.
But
that's also I think the beautiful part of this nation, and this is not exceptional to America because other nations have done the same thing. Yes, even talk about slavery, which is certainly, many people have called that this country's original sin. And there have been horrible things done in the name of freedom. And there is a certain dissonance between a document that says we all have inalienable rights, all the while enslaving people who we say don't have some of those inalienable rights. So there's a dissonance that exists there. At the same time, 250 years in, think of how far we've grown from that.
Yep.
And I think without the foundations that we have, we would not have, if I could use the word, evolved past some of those thoughts into where we are today, whereby it is now codified law that you cannot enslave a person. So that may not seem like a big deal, but in 200 years of history, that's a fairly fast clip by which we have been able to grow through that. And I think that's a testimony to the exceptionalism of this nation.
Those ideals have always been aspirational. The Declaration does not say all men are being treated as if they are equal, because they weren't, and everybody knew it.
Yeah.
These have always been aspirations, and I'm so thankful that we are slowly making progress towards them.
More perfect.
The Declaration also says we hold these truths to be self-evident. Is there any truth that historically has been less self-evident, that all men are created equal? I mean, looking through human history is not a history of treating people that way. But I will say, you quoted Abraham Lincoln's Gettysburg Address earlier.
Yeah.
Another great piece that Lincoln wrote and that's etched on the wall in the Lincoln Memorial is his second inaugural.
Yeah.
And his second inaugural was given, in the middle of the Civil War. Hundreds of thousands of Americans have died at this point. It's too early to tell how it's going to go. And he really wrestled. I mean, it's short. It's another just amazing piece of political writing, and I don't have it memorized, so people should just go look it up and read it.
Yeah.
But it is wrestling with this idea of it is absolutely incompatible to believe that all humans are created equal with the inherent dignity that the image of their creator having on them has to include, and simultaneously to believe that it's acceptable to wring your living out of the sweat of another man's brow. And yet, in the middle of this horrible struggle, both sides are praying to the same God for help. It's a great piece of really political theology from someone whose personal theology was questionable.
Questionable. Sure.
But it's something that we as a country have wrestled with well over the years. And as Dr. Martin Luther King said, the arc of history is long, but it bends toward justice.
Bends towards justice. Yeah. Changing gears a little bit, Valentina, you've mentioned several different points in which your experience as an immigrant shapes your view and appreciation of this country, freedom and otherwise. And so I'd love to just expound on that at any level you'd like to. But for people who were not born in America, what do you think Native Americans, and by that I mean people born in this country, often fail to appreciate about our country that perhaps you see that we don't?
Well, I don't know. All my thoughts and everything only is around how much I am grateful that I live in this country, because no other country in the world, as you meant it, regardless of what anybody thinks about this country, is today the ever best place to live. And I don't know how all other immigrants and what they are thinking, but the people who never experienced freedom, never experienced the level of life they live here. Let's say we came and saw that if you are just working hard, if you are not in a very, very high end positions, you work definitely, you can live a good life, a very good life that in other countries may be considered even very prosperous and very big one. So, and I see that not Americans understand that. They may be focusing on something else, and which is good. And then, former teacher, I used to encourage students to strive for a better education, to get more in life or something. But the main idea is that this country provides an opportunity to everybody, regardless of your religion, your age, your ethnicity, or anything, equal rights to work and achieve only what you put before you as an aim to do. We worked in a wonderful place, but all those places like churches or ministries where I work do not pay big money, but we work hard and we live a very decent life. We were able to pay off the house, to pay off all the cars, and we live debt-free and have everything, and was able to retire and allow ourselves to enjoy this time. This country can provide. No other country in the world can.
Yeah. We take that for granted.
Mm-hmm. Yes, you do. I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, that's great. That's great. So let's put on you were a teacher, and I want to think about the next generation with this question. Let's say that we had others sitting around this table that were much younger than all of us at this table. What encouragement would you give to them about what quality traits they need, what they need to be advocating for to help this country continue to prosper and flourish and continue to do the things that we've already talked about in this discussion? What is needed for this next generation? What do you want them to hear from your perspective? And
may I start? Because when they start, what I say doesn't have equal level. But actually, my idea is, as a former teacher, I think what is important for the younger generation to remember and know the history of your own country and what the people and different generations learned lessons from the history. There were lessons, you can learn bad, good ones. They need to know the history of this own country. And they need also to value the principles on which this country was founded. And like I say, I don't go deep into anything else. And also they have to value the principle that this country had from the very beginning, and many other countries as well, the principle of family. The family should be the base, the foundation for the future life and prosperity of any child, that he will choose the right way to live, to work, to respect, and value.
Yeah, good.
That's great. I agree. I also think our young people need a dose of civic hope. I mean, here in the church, we are giving people a much bigger and more important and eternal hope in the person of Jesus Christ, right?
Yeah.
But I think it would be a mistake for kids in this country who to not think about the hope for this country and how they can participate in the American experiment and keep it going for another 50 years. Just like Lincoln said at Gettysburg, he had this hope that this government will not perish from the earth, but that is only possible in his time due to literal sacrifice. It's possible in our time due to the sacrifice of taking the time to learn about history, like you said, Valentina, about the issues facing us. It means having the humility to engage with people across different political opinions on a human level, and I think it means praying for this country very hard.
That's great. Nels, what about you? What would you say?
So I agree with all of that, especially that last point. I do think, and kind of tying back into a question you asked earlier about how Christians should sort of engage with politics. I think it has to start with recognizing that politics is not an ultimate thing. When you're told every 2 or 4 years that this election determines the fate of the country, and if the wrong team wins, we've lost everything, that's not a place that promotes human flourishing long term. But it is so easy for us as followers of Christ to buy in to that kind of anxiety, and it comes really from a place of lack of faith. Jesus doesn't stay up late watching election returns because he's worried about who's going to win.
Yeah.
And I talk a lot to younger Christians who are looking to go into politics about this, and I always leave them with a couple of verses from John 12. It's John 12, 42 and 43. And John 12 covers a bunch of different reactions to Jesus, ranging from the audible voice of God confirming him as his son, to the religious leaders deciding they're going to kill him. But the most tragic response there is at the end, and it says this: many even of the authorities believed in him. The religious leaders actually genuinely believed that this guy Jesus is the long-promised Messiah. But for fear of the Pharisees, they would not confess him because they didn't want to be put out of the synagogue, for they loved the glory that comes from man more than the glory that comes from God. And that's so easy to get sucked into. And if you don't keep yourself from getting sucked into that, and by glory that comes from man, we're talking about how many retweets did I get?
Sure.
Tiny little things that are fleeting. And you have to protect yourself from that. And if you don't, this experiment won't last.
My advice would be based on something else Jesus said, which is when he famously took a coin and said, render to God the things that are God's and to Caesar the things that are Caesar's. Well, the implication of that statement is that on the coin was the image of Caesar. Therefore, there is some modicum of control that God has given to Caesar to steward and to reign over. And there are things that Caesar is due, all under the umbrella of God's sovereignty and providence. But the fact that you are made in the image of God means your whole life is to be stewarded well to God's glory. And I think sometimes, especially in the evangelical world, I think where we have such a sharp distinction between the material and the spiritual, and we even talk about salvation as salvation is basically a pathway to escape this world and to be with the Lord forever, which is not bad. But I think it often, unfortunately, implies that there aren't goods that you can give your life to on this earth. And so what I would want to encourage a younger generation with is to live a more integrated faith, particularly in the area of civic engagement. And I would love to raise up a new generation of young men and women who would have a passion for God, but also say, there are things that I need to render to Caesar, and I would like to be in a role where I can help this nation steward the things that are rendered to Caesar. Because I think sometimes I see Christians go on one side or the other, the two ditches that we tend to fall in. Certainly, we've talked about turning government into some kind of an idol that you worship. But perhaps the other side that many fall to is this abdication where we go, it's so dirty and nasty and it doesn't matter and who cares? I hate all that government. I hate all that politics stuff. It doesn't matter. I just want to be with Jesus, just me and King Jesus, right? But King Jesus has set you in a nation that needs to be led. And I would encourage you to think about, at whatever level you can, to lead. And I see glimpses of that, particularly with the new generation, but I think there's a lot to be desired there. So,
100%. Well, and think about what God said to the exiles in Jeremiah 29.
Yep.
Seek the welfare of the city that you've been sent to.
Yep.
Because in the good of that city, you will find good for yourself.
Yeah. Well, I'm so grateful to have all of you here. I'd like to ask one final question. I don't know what you're going to be doing on the 250th anniversary. Maybe you're eating hot dogs, or last night at the White House, they had dirt bikes doing backflips in front of the East Lawn. So maybe you're doing that,
Not sure my insurance policy will cover that.
But as you think about, let's say, the next 50 years of American history, what are you hopeful? And if so, what gives you hope about this country, and particularly being a Christian in this country?
Well, I again, from my point of view, the most important hope that we can have is always only in God. Because nobody else can guarantee anything in this world, only God. And so, as we discussed previously, if we will, within the family, starting from the very small society, our family, will continue to instill in our children that if they rely only on their human power, wisdom, and knowledge, they are not going to prosper. There's without any compassion that we have to instill in our children, understanding the needs of other people, how to help people in need. We can't look into building a flourishing society, like we said. That's what I believe we should start from.
Thank you.
As a Christian, I have hope because I look at young people and I see them hungering for real truth. We as a country have been real in our feelings for like the last 50 or 60 years. But the American ideal is based on real truth about human equality, human dignity, and the value of human freedom. Those are real things that are not feelings because they come from a source that is greater than any of us. And I think if our young people, particularly in the body of Christ, can be spokespeople for truth, certainly about Jesus Christ and the ultimate hope that he offers, but also just in the civic reality of what those truths mean for how we behave with each other in a society, I think we might be okay.
My kids hate it. They'll say, I feel something that you feel or you think. They hate that. Dad jokes. They hate stuff like that. But yeah, I'm making a point. Nels, what about you? Hopeful?
I'm an American, so I'm required to be optimistic. God's hand of blessing has been on this country for 250 years. And as long as God does not withdraw his hand of blessing, there is every reason to be hopeful. So let's pray and hope.
Yeah. It's good. Yeah. And I'll go back to Acts 17. I think we have been set here in the providence of God for reasons that are only known to him, to dwell in this particular habitation that we call the United States of America. And the point is that we were put here so that people might seek him and if perhaps not find him. And so I go back to the mission. Like, this is our mission field. Mm-hmm. And this is the people that we are called to live with and to dwell with and to share the gospel with and to persuade to the ultimate truth of Jesus Christ. And it's the only country I've lived in, So I'd like to think that as a Christian, I would say that about any nation, but I was born in this country. So this is the country to which I feel particularly obligated to share the gospel with, and just look forward to seeing all that God's going to do. So I hope that you all have a wonderful semiquincentennial. I just love saying that word, semiquincentennial. I'm going to say it over and over again. I know. I'm going to say it over and over again. 250 years of a wonderful nation, not a perfect nation, but one that God has used and we pray will continue to use. And one of the things that makes it great are individuals just like you. So Jennifer, Nels, and Valentina, thank you so much for being part of this special Wordsmith podcast. And until next time, thanks for being here.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.